You are not allowed to dance or stay close to her!
Grace had once been the loudest, brightest thing in the Walker household. She was 9 years old and full of a kind of fearless energy that filled every corner of the estate. She chased the dogs through the gardens, made up songs in the kitchen that made the staff laugh, and refused to go to sleep without a story every single night. The house had been loud. It had been alive. Then the accident happened. A single collision on a rain-slicked road. Thomas's wife, Elaine, was gone, and Grace was left paralyzed. Her legs no longer responding, her body trapped, her spirit retreating into a silence that no one in the house knew how to reach. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far this channel reaches. And if you enjoy powerful emotional stories with real-life lessons, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thomas Walker did not inherit his wealth. He built it, brick by brick, deal by deal, from a single apartment and a single idea that most people laughed at. By the time he was 45, his name was everywhere. Technology, real estate, financial services. An empire assembled through sheer will and a refusal to lose that bordered on obsession. The world, from the outside, believed Thomas Walker had everything a man could ever want. His estate proved it. Tucked into one of the wealthiest suburban neighborhoods in the country, it sat behind iron gates on a long tree-lined road. The gardens were immaculate, hedges trimmed to sharp lines, flower beds laid out in careful rows of color, a stone fountain in the courtyard that hummed quietly through every season. The lawns were green the way only money could make them green. The house itself was all pale stone and tall windows, built to impress and built to last. From the road, driving past on a Sunday afternoon, it looked like paradise. Like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But inside, behind the closed doors and the drawn curtains, the house was almost entirely silent. It had not always been this way. There had been a time, not so long ago, when the Walker estate was the loudest place on the street. When a 9-year-old girl named Grace tore through the hallways barefoot, when her laughter rang off the marble floors, when the kitchen staff smiled at each other because she had just walked in and demanded to know what they were making. She sang. She argued. She asked questions that had no answers and refused to accept that. She was fearless and bright and alive in a way that made the whole house feel inhabited. Then the accident happened. A rain-slicked road. A single collision. Elaine was gone. And Grace was left in a wheelchair, her legs no longer answering, her voice growing quieter with each passing week, until one morning Thomas realized he had not heard her laugh in over a month. The house was beautiful. It was also completely, devastatingly silent. Thomas Walker did what Thomas Walker had always done when the world said no. He pushed harder. He flew Grace to Switzerland first, a surgical team in Zurich that came with a reputation and a price tag that would have made most men flinch. Thomas did not flinch. He signed the paperwork and sat in a pale blue waiting room and told himself this was the one. This was the answer. Then came Tokyo, an experimental nerve regeneration program that had shown promise in early trials. Thomas made the calls. He spent what needed to be spent. He moved Grace across the Pacific and held her hand the entire way and did not let himself think about what would happen if this one failed too. It failed. Boston came next. Then London. Then Los Angeles. Each city, a different specialist, a different clinic, a different set of tests and careful conversations in quiet rooms where doctors spoke in measured tones and used words like, unfortunately. Thomas sat through every one. He listened. He asked the questions. He wrote the checks. And every single time, the answer came back wrapped in the same polite, devastating packaging. We are sorry. There is nothing more we can do. Grace felt each failure the way a child feels the ground disappearing beneath her. Slowly, then all at once, She stopped asking to go outside. She stopped calling for Thomas at night, those small, sleepy calls that used to drift down the hallway and find him no matter where he was in the house. She stopped looking up when someone entered her room. Her world folded in on itself, smaller and quieter with each passing week, until one evening Thomas stood in the doorway of her bedroom and realized he could not remember the last time he had heard her voice. He had built an empire. He had beaten every opponent the business world had ever placed in front of him. But this small, silent room, this still child, this grief with no edges, this was the one fight Thomas Walker did not know how to win. The afternoon was warm, the kind that settles into everything. The stone, the air, the skin. Grace sat alone near the edge of the garden path, her wheelchair parked in the shadow of the hedge. Her nanny had gone inside for water. Grace did not notice. She was staring at the gravel between her wheels, at nothing at all. Then something moved. A boy slipped through a gap in the hedge, quiet as something that had done this before. He was barefoot, his feet bare against the warm stone. His shirt was olive and torn at one shoulder, too big for his thin frame. His shorts were held up by a belt that had given up trying to fit. His hair was uncombed, his knees marked with old scars, the kind that come from years of concrete and not enough care. But his eyes were alive. They swept the garden in one quick glance, then landed on Grace. And something in them shifted. Not pity. Something older. A recognition. He knew what that kind of stillness looked like. He had lived inside it. He did not speak. He simply began to dance. It was not graceful. It was not meant to be. His arms swung out wide, his legs bent in directions that seemed unlikely, his whole body twisting as though he were losing a fight with the air and enjoying every second of it. He stumbled on purpose, caught himself with exaggerated drama, and crossed his eyes until his whole face became something absurd and warm. Grace blinked. Her mouth moved, just barely. Then a giggle escaped. Small. Surprised. Almost accidental. The boy grinned and doubled down, spinning, falling, rising again like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to him. Grace laughed. Not quietly. Not carefully. A real laugh, deep and shaking and loud, that rose out of her like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. It rang across the garden and carried into the open windows of the house. For Daniel it felt like winning the world. Daniel had no address, no last name that anyone had ever written down. When the weather was warm he slept under the overpass near the highway, on a patch of concrete that stayed dry even when it rained. When it did not stay dry, he found the back doorways of closed shops and curled into the smallest shape his body could make and waited for morning. His mother had died when he was very young. He could not remember her face clearly anymore. What he remembered was a feeling, warmth, and the smell of something cooking and a voice that was kind. Then it was gone. His father had left before that or maybe after. Daniel was not sure. The two absences had blurred together over the years into a single shapeless fact. There was no one. For a while, there had been a woman who ran a food truck near the interstate. She kept scraps aside for him sometimes. Bread, mostly, and sometimes a bruised piece of fruit. She did not ask where he lived or why he was alone. She simply set the food at the edge of the counter and looked away while he took it. Then one spring she was gone. The truck was gone. And after that there was no one again. But Daniel danced. He had always danced. When hunger sat heavy in his stomach and his legs felt like wet sand, he danced. When drivers honked and shouted at him for standing too close to the road, he danced. When the cold crept into his bones at night and sleep would not come, he danced. Sometimes strangers threw coins. Sometimes they walked past without looking. It did not matter. Dancing was not about them. It was the one thing in the world that belonged entirely to him. No one had given it to him, and no one could take it away. It was his voice when he had no other. His proof, quiet and stubborn, that he was still here. That was how Daniel had survived. And on this particular afternoon, it became something more. Thomas was at his desk when he heard it. He had been going through quarterly reports, numbers on a screen, projections, margins, the kind of work that required nothing from him except attention. The study was quiet. The house was quiet. It was always quiet now, and he had learned to stop noticing. Then the sound came through the open window, and he noticed. Laughter. Grace's laughter. High and fast and completely, unmistakably real. A sound he had not heard in this house in over a year. He stood so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He crossed the room and gripped the windowsill and looked down into the garden. Grace was clapping. Her cheeks were flushed, her back straight in the wheelchair, actually straight, not the slouch he had grown used to seeing. Her eyes were wide and fixed on something at the far end of the lawn. And there, barefoot on the grass, spinning and stumbling and falling and getting back up again like it was the greatest performance of his life, was a boy. Thin. Torn clothes. A stranger who had no business being inside these gates. Thomas's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward his phone. He would call security. He would have the boy removed. Then he looked at Grace. Really looked. Her face was alive. Her eyes were bright in a way he had not seen since before the accident. Open and full of something that looked impossibly like joy. She was not just watching. She was laughing. She was clapping. She was present in a way she had not been in months, and the person who had done this was not a surgeon or a specialist or a program on 3 continents. It was a barefoot boy with nothing. Thomas lowered the phone. He stepped back from the window and watched, hidden behind the curtain, his jaw still tight but his chest doing something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to place the feeling. Hope. He had almost forgotten what it felt like. Daniel came back the next afternoon the same way. Quiet, careful, slipping through the hedge like someone who had learned long ago how to move without being noticed. Grace was already waiting near the stone path, her eyes bright and fixed on the gap in the greenery. "Ready?" he asked, lifting both arms like a referee about to start a match. Grace nodded and grinned. Before he could move, a shadow fell across the path. Thomas Walker stepped out from behind the garden wall. Tall. A pressed shirt, sleeves rolled. His expression gave nothing away. Daniel froze. He knew that look. Had seen it on police officers, on shopkeepers, on anyone who had ever decided in less than a second that he did not belong. His hands curled at his sides. He was ready to run. "Daddy." Grace's voice cut through the silence. "Please. Don't send him away. Please." Thomas held his gaze on Daniel, then stepped closer. Deliberate. He looked the boy up and down, the torn shirt, the bare feet, the scars, and then his eyes settled on Daniel's face. "What's your name?" "Daniel." Quiet. But it did not shake. "Why did you come here, Daniel?" Daniel swallowed. "I saw her. The first day. She looked sad. I thought maybe if I danced she would smile. I didn't come to take anything, sir. I just wanted to give her something." The words settled into Thomas the way rain settles into dry ground. Slowly, then deeper than expected. He was quiet for a long time. "Where do you live?" His voice was softer now. "Anywhere," Daniel said. "Under the overpass mostly. Sometimes I dance for people and they give me a little money. Sometimes they don't. But I dance anyway." Grace reached out and touched Daniel's hand. "He makes me happy, Daddy," she whispered. Thomas looked at his daughter. Really looked. Then he nodded once. You can stay. In the garden where I can see you. Daniel nodded fast, relief flooding his face. He turned to Grace with a grin. Showtime. She clapped. And the garden became a stage again. One afternoon became 3. 3 became a week. Thomas instructed the household staff quietly. Let Daniel in at 4. He leaves at 6. He eats before he goes. No one questioned it. Daniel arrived every day with something new. He danced like a broken robot, then switched into a slow-motion replay of an invisible soccer match. He narrated battles between the squirrels and the oak tree with sound effects that made Grace laugh so hard she had to cover her mouth. He fell down, got back up, bowed like a king, and crossed his eyes until her whole body shook. But beneath all of it, something else was happening. Something quieter. Grace's hands grew stronger from clapping. One afternoon she lifted both arms above her head and held them there, trembling for 5 seconds. The next day she copied Daniel's robot dance with her upper body. Her voice grew bolder. She called out directions. No, do the other one. Again. She tried to wheel herself in small circles when Daniel spun. Every small movement felt like a victory. Thomas watched. From the kitchen window. From the balcony. From the edge of the garden. He noticed that Daniel never asked for anything before he started. He noticed the boy always glanced at Grace's face before trying something new, reading her, adjusting. He noticed that when food was brought out, Daniel ate slowly, like someone who understood the weight of a single meal. One evening Grace talked at dinner. Really talked. Daddy, did you see the one where he pretended to be a traffic light? Daddy, I felt something in my leg today. Daddy, can he come back tomorrow? At her next checkup, the doctor studied her chart, then looked up. Something has shifted, he said quietly. Whatever you are doing, don't stop. That night Thomas stood alone in the garden. The fountain hummed. He looked at the patch of grass where Daniel danced every afternoon, where something broken had begun slowly to mend. He whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." No one heard him, but the garden held the words gently, like a promise. It started as an ordinary afternoon. The sun was low and golden. The garden smelled like cut grass and warm stone. Daniel was mid-performance. His slow-motion dance, the one where he moved as though the air had turned thick and heavy, every gesture stretched and absurd. Grace watched, laughing so hard she had to press her hand to her chest to catch her breath. Then she went quiet. "Wait," she said. She sat up straighter. Her hands moved to the armrests. Her fingers gripped the metal until her knuckles went white. "Let me try something." Thomas, on the stone bench nearby, went rigid. He wanted to stop her, but he saw the look on her face. Fierce, determined, alive, and he did not move. Daniel stopped dancing. He watched, his eyes wide and still. Grace took a breath. She pushed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The garden held its breath. Then her shoulders rose. Then her chest. Then, inch by inch, her hips lifted from the seat. She was trembling. Her arms shook. Her jaw was set. She held. 1, Daniel whispered. 2, Thomas counted, stepping forward without realizing it, his eyes burning. 3, Grace breathed and sank back into the chair. Slowly. Gently. She was panting. Her cheeks were wet. But she was smiling. "I did it," she said. "Daddy, I did it. Did you see?" The garden fell into silence. Not the old silence. Not the dead, heavy kind that had filled this place for so long. This was different. This was the silence that comes after something sacred. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her. "You did it, Grace," he said, his voice cracking. Thomas knelt on the other side. His hands were shaking. He touched her forehead, gently, the way you touch something precious and real. You are the bravest person I have ever known. His voice broke on the last word. Grace reached for both of them. One small hand for her father. One for Daniel. I'm not scared anymore, she whispered. When he dances, I feel like I can move. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep, Thomas walked the hallways. He thought about Grace. About the way her face lit up when Daniel walked through the hedge. About the way she reached for him like he was the most important person in the world. Then he thought about his own pride, his reputation, his image. The battle inside him was real. But by the time the sky turned gray, Thomas knew what he had to do. He found Daniel on the back steps, knees pulled to his chest, staring into the dark. Thomas sat beside him. They were quiet for a moment. You shouldn't be out here alone, Thomas said. Daniel shrugged. I'm used to it, sir. Thomas looked at him. The boy's face was thin. His eyes cautious but hopeful. Not anymore, Thomas said. This is your home now, Daniel. You live here. You eat here. You go to school. And you never again have to wonder where you will sleep. Daniel stared. His lips parted. Nothing came out. You gave my daughter something no money could buy, Thomas said. You gave her hope. And anyone who gives hope like that is worth loving. Daniel's eyes filled. Tears slipped down his cheeks. For the first time in his life, he had been truly seen. Not as a nuisance or a beggar, but as someone who mattered. That night, Daniel slept in a real bed, in a place he could finally call home. The story spread fast. Business partners warned him. Local news ran headlines. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. But Thomas had changed. My daughter is standing again, he said calmly. That is the only image I care about. Grace was direct. Daniel is my best friend. If you don't like him, you don't understand anything. Slowly, the voices quieted. Neighbors whispered, that boy is helping Grace Walker walk again. Maybe kindness really is worth more than money. Daniel did not read the headlines. Every afternoon he danced. Every afternoon he laughed with Grace. The estate that once echoed with grief was now full of life. Mornings started with Grace calling for Daniel. Afternoons rang with laughter. Grace's therapy accelerated. With Daniel beside her, she took small steps, then longer ones. She still used her wheelchair sometimes. But fear no longer controlled her. One evening, Grace looked at Daniel. I'm not alone anymore. I have a brother. Thomas laughed, but inside his heart swelled. For the first time in years, his estate was not just a house. It was a home. And on a quiet evening, as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson, Thomas stood at the garden's edge and watched Grace take careful steps down the stone path. Daniel beside her, holding her hand, laughing at something only they understood. Thomas whispered to himself, I thought I had everything. But I had nothing until he walked through that hedge. From that day forward, Thomas Walker was known not just as a billionaire, but as a man with a heart. Daniel was no longer the homeless boy from the overpass. He was a walker. And Grace's story became a quiet beacon of hope. Proof that sometimes the cure we need does not come from medicine or money, but from love, kindness, and a friendship no one saw coming.
And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps support the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.